Call on members' order of the day number 5.
Commerce Supermarket Adjudicator and Code of Conduct Amendment Bill, first reading.
Mojo Mathis.
I move that the Commerce Supermarket Adjudicator and Code of Conduct Amendment Bill be now read a first time. I nominate the Commerce Committee to consider the bill. I developed this bill to address the real problem that is common knowledge in the supermarket and grocery industry. At present, just 2 big supermarket chains control over 90% of the grocery market in New Zealand. This means that small to local food suppliers, the people in New Zealand who grow and produce the food that we eat, can struggle to access that market. This bill provides a very simple regulatory measure that will create a more balanced playing field for the long-term benefit of both consumers and local suppliers. And I want to start by acknowledging the work of former Green MP Sue Kedgley, who devoted significant time and energy in this area. This bill picks up and builds upon the work that was done by Sue. So what does the bill do? It requires the appointment of a supermarket adjudicator who is tasked with then developing a code of conduct for supermarkets in consultation with all key stakeholders, and then with receiving and dealing with complaints under the code. The Ministry of Justice Bill of Rights Assessment Report has found that the bill is consistent with the rights and freedoms in the Bill of Rights Act. And it also gave a very clear description of the bill's intent and purpose, which I will repeat here. The purpose of the bill is to promote competition in New Zealand market by introducing measures to prevent or mitigate restrictive trade practices for the long-term benefit of consumers and suppliers. This aim is entirely consistent with existing regulatory purposes in New Zealand competition law, such as the Commerce Act and the Telecommunications Act, which are focused on making sure that markets work properly and fairly. And that principle is very important for most New Zealanders. We go about our daily lives, buying and selling, feeding our families. We place trust in the system that we are getting a fair deal, that we're not being ripped off. And competitive markets can help us provide us with the choices that we want as consumers. And the presence of competition helps ensure that retailers are honest. But when a market lacks competition, and when it's dominated by a few large players, as is the case with supermarkets in New Zealand, then there is a strong case for government to step in and ensure that it is regulated at the appropriate level, which is what my bill provides for. So as I've said, the problem is that over 90% of the groceries retail market is controlled by just 2 companies in New Zealand, and this makes us one of the most concentrated markets in the OECD when it comes to groceries. In fact, one of the most concentrated in the world. And what this means is that there is a very unequal power relationship between the big supermarkets and local food producers who employ people in our region and make great food. But if they want their food to be on the supermarket shelves, it can be very hard to achieve that. Different suppliers face different issues with different supermarkets, but across the board, there are people who say supplying their products to supermarkets is very difficult. This is because one supermarket can dictate the terms of an agreement to a supplier, and if the supplier doesn't like the terms, the only other option is to go to the other supermarket, who you can dictate pretty much the same term. The fact is that supermarkets have unfair market power, and this can result in restrictive trade practices. They can buy produce at a high price and sell it, they can buy produce at a low price and sell it at a high price. There has been conflicting evidence about exactly what retail margins there are for fresh produce. And it's likely that one of the supermarket adjudicators' first tasks would be to get to the bottom of this and make sure that everyone is getting a fair deal. Suppliers have also told me about other problems, such as being forced to reveal all recipes and processes, not just the ingredients on the labels, to a supermarket, which gives up a supplier's intellectual property and competitive edge. I've heard of supermarkets dumping suppliers or their products at very short notice, leaving them, the suppliers, holding large amounts of packaging and ingredients with no way to sell them. And I've heard about unfair behaviour around selling products on special, with suppliers paying the extra costs for advertising and the full discount not being passed on to customers. And I also want to say that I've heard from supermarkets too. The other side of the problem is the power wielded by the massive multinational grocery suppliers, which can, in fact, be turned against supermarkets. When a market lacks competition and is dominated, the supermarket might sometimes be seen as the bad guys when it's really big overseas food companies who are calling the shots. And when so many of the products on the supermarket shelves come from just a handful of multinational food companies, they can potentially exercise their market power against the supermarket. And a code of conduct and a supermarket adjudicator could address this too. And the adjudicator could be charged with addressing unfair market manipulation and restrictive practices, no matter who is responsible. My bill requires all relevant parties to be consulted and involved in developing the code of conduct to ensure that it's balanced and fair. It does not prescribe the code itself. It is not appropriate for Parliament to decide exactly what the code should say, which is why I've left it to the adjudicator to write the draft code in consultation with key stakeholders and then be signed off by the Commerce Minister. And that ministerial sign-off is very important to ensure that no one party had taken over the process and tipped the scale too far one way or the other. I'm sure people remember the Commerce Commission investigation into Countdown last year. And some might say that the inquiry is proof that we already have a system for dealing with restrictive trade practices. But we need to remember it took massive media outcry and led by Shane Jones to force that inquiry. And whereas the outcome of the investigation by the Commerce Commission found that no rules or laws had been broken, it does not mean that it found that the current system was working fairly. And in fact, it shone light on the fact that many produce suppliers did actually have serious complaints about how they were treated. And not many wanted to speak out publicly because of fear of repercussions. And that is my experience in talking with suppliers too. And so what the Commerce Commission showed is that the system was not strong enough to deal with the concerns that suppliers had. And that is why I've drafted this bill, to strengthen the system, bring in new regulatory tools, and because what the Commerce Commission powers are limited by law. And it's become clear that the Commerce Commission, what it's allowed to do is not enough. Not about picking on any particular supermarket, it's about saying that the current regulatory rules aren't working, so we need to replace them, and I look forward to the debate tonight and the support from parties in the House.